Hello, my name is Norman Valdez, and I welcome you to another episode of the Brain Trainer AI for Social Impact podcast. Today, we're excited to have Tim Lockie, CEO and founder of the Human-Centric. With over 20 years of experience in nonprofits and technology, Tim is a passionate advocate for digital transformation. He is dedicated to helping nonprofits of all sizes become tech resilient through his innovative digital guidance methodology. In this episode, we explore Tim's journey in his work and reshaping the nonprofit sector technology. Tim's work with the Human Stack, focusing on human-centered approaches to digital transformation in the nonprofit sector. Tim shares insights on how organizations can become tech resilient by prioritizing the people behind the technology. We also dive into how AI and the digital tools are reshaping the way nonprofits operate, and why is it crucial for leaders to embrace a human-centric mindset when adopting these innovations. Tune in to hear how nonprofits can navigate the rapidly evolving world of AI and technology and discover how human-centered digital transformation can drive meaningful social impact. Okay, welcome everyone. And today we have our wonderful guest, Tim Lockie. And Alex, please just get started.
Yeah, no, it's great to have you here, Tim. Obviously, I've run into you several times over the last year or two, but really given the space that you hold in not only in the sector, but as we're focusing on social impact and technology for the sector, we would like to start off by trying to understand what was your journey like? And obviously you've been in the space for a long time, but how did you end up focusing on the human stack and nonprofit and technology and yeah, just understanding how you landed here?
Think that I think like the rest of us, there's just something that bugs me when things don't ever go the right way. Like when you see problems happening over and over and over, eventually I feel like a lot of us just can't ignore it anymore. And because of the place that I was in as a consultant for nonprofits of a major enterprise digital platform, and doing that over and over, and then really, really feeling it when nonprofits would not use this technology well. I think I just got to a place where I couldn't ignore that maybe we're solving the wrong problem here, and that we're not applying the same kinds of engineering and design and architecture to the way humans behave that we are around the way that technology behaves. And eventually the contrast became so stark that I couldn't ignore it. And the statistics were backing that up. But there's just a huge problem around humans using technology, especially in the nonprofit space.
And on that, you've been working on the space technology nonprofits for like over 2 decades. What are some of the things you've seen over that span of time, maybe that you can highlight at moments or shifts? So just to give you an example, we are going through this transformation with AI, and I think most people recognize that it's a significant one, and they're drawn parallels to the internet, social media. Like, what are some of the things you've been observing specifically for the nonprofits or social impact organizations that you service about what we're going on with today?
Yeah, I think that there have been phases. So when I started working with nonprofits in the early 2000s, there was, the internet was just getting adopted, like not the internet, but digital platforms were just getting adopted by nonprofits. Everybody knew that we needed to use these kinds of tools now. And so I think that the fundraising space was just getting used to it. Everything from recruiting was just starting to get used to digitizing. So I was around for a lot of the digitizing of nonprofits. I did that with a mid-sized organization, which is where I learned the platform Salesforce, and could see that there would be a lot of benefits to nonprofits that use a platform like that. So I think that has definitely been one swing. I feel like there's been a swing into moving from point solutions to platforms. I think that that's under the surface of a lot of the issues that happen right now. there has been this transition from one single, you know, solution for one department into a larger platform way of approaching things. I think that obviously there's well, I don't know if it's obvious. I'd love to hear what you think on this, but I think fundraising, especially for nonprofits, went through a transition. Understanding that fundraising online was a very different approach to all of the approaches that had been used before. And, a lot of comparisons to checkout uh, at Amazon or, these different gateways for processing. So I think that was a big one. I don't think any of them have near the potential for change that AI has, though. Maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe I'm too bullish about it. But I just think that we are, all of us, entering a very different era with AI. I think it's analogous to moving to an internet connected world. I think it's about that.
And just following up on that, like I think we both share your impression that this is transformative in ways that technology has not been in the past. That's both on the challenge side, never mind for the sector, but what it does mean for democracy. If we didn't deal with social media well, how are we going to deal with it on steroids? But also on the use case side, I want to ask you, given your extensive expertise with the sector, are we ready for it on the use case side? So, for instance, we as a sector are not handling using data well. Like we're a ton of data sitting underutilized. We're not leadership, collaboration wise. We're holding on to data. We're not sharing it in material ways. It's sitting there underutilized. What does that mean for use cases when we are really exploring AI leaning into data? Is there opportunity to really rectify what we haven't done with data, and how are you seeing that transition?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I'd be curious because I know that you've done a lot of work in this area specifically. Like, I'm going to want to turn the mic around and hear what you think on that as well. What I will say, I think no, we're not ready for it. Nobody's ready for it. I think some people are more coordinated. Some organizational structure are set up to be more coordinated. And this is where your ability to process things well together is absolutely going to become the new gold standard. And I think that that's actually more important than your ability to use data well, is your ability to process things. And I think that that's about to hit the forefront. But, you know, on really what matters for organizations. How well can you move from this one person doing this one function to this one person managing 5 AI agents that are helping you do that function either 5 times faster or 10x better? And after you've done that function, you know where to put it so that the next person in the chain knows how to use that as well. And I think that those kinds of scenarios are about to become the most important part of organizational. But
Yeah.
that's my sense. I've got one other thought on the nature of data itself in an AI world. But for both you and for both of you, I'd love to hear what you're seeing in that question as well with data.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting one because when I think about like the change that we're going, which is very transformational, and talk about digital transformation, I think it's very important for as many people as possible, but particularly the leaders, to get a good level of understanding to what is this transformation, what is this technology, what is the difference between what we're living through today that we didn't really have before. Because I think the tendency is, as you said, maybe there's resistance to change. Because, like nonprofits are strapped for resources. So they figure out ways to do things. And they're like, why do we need to change this if it's already kind of working for us? And I think the gap in understanding is, if you just were to understand just what is possible and then how this technology can potentially change things, then you might be able to say like, this might actually have a better outcome for me to amplify my mission, my vision. If I can just understand how I can actually apply this for my own use case, for my own process, for my own workflows, and then make this work for me in a way that actually can have actually some beneficial outcome. And I think that's why like education, as Brain Trainers is set out to do, which is a platform, a way to actually tackle that specific gap in knowledge and understanding, as you also do, because you're also an educator and you do AI training on for nonprofits. I think the issue is that it's just to translate that understanding, that level of understanding that will make people and leaders to recognize the opportunity and actually make decisions and strategy from there.
Yeah, I
So I don't
think
know if
that's
you have
well
any
said.
reflect.
Yeah, I think that's AI is one of the in generative AI. I mean, to an end user, predictive AI isn't something that they encounter in a way that they have a lot of choice around, right? So generative AI is really what's driving a lot of this change because it's so end user focused. It's one of the only technologies that I've seen where an executive with no background can step in, put up a prompt, and get immediate value from a technology. And this is highly related to the way and the nature of information and insight. So raw data has to become information before it can get turned into insight. And in a large organization where you have a lot of different people running that data, combining and aggregating it into some level of information that can then be converted into insight for executive leadership, that chain is so arduous that a lot of times executives have given up on ever actually getting information level insight, and they have to rely on their instinct instead. They've always been running on that, and they would happily start using insight if they could, but they just don't have the level of reporting that would be really helpful and constructive in their decision making.
So just reflecting back on putting the question back on us, I think that there's the issue related whether it's to data or AI, and you sit very much in the middle of it, focusing on the human stack, is the fact that on one end, we have the technology isn't necessarily the issue. It's the human role in it and culture and mindset on one end. Like it's a misunderstanding. Sometimes it's tied to funding, like organizations are being funded to hold a certain role, so thereby they're holding on or controlling data and so forth. There's often a disconnect with understanding what not be data or AI, especially from the leadership positions. But I think it comes down to the fact that often these technologies, especially looking at AI now, are being developed and deployed by organizations that are shareholder profit driven. They are not, they're focused on incremental product driven, and not necessarily developing it in the eyes of nonprofits or social impact and philanthropy. So there's a mismatch in terms of what we can use it for. And then often there's disincentives for approaching it in the ways that we want to do. But I want to talk to you about how do we actually, in your eyes, go about changing that? And obviously our focus is on getting diverse voices around the table so that we can be part of the development conversation. Because we have that disconnect, have you found that focusing on use cases and stories to see why AI and data is important to be a way to start moving the understanding?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that there's a couple of different responses I have to that. So, because it's a big question, right? And I think all of us are trying to figure out what part of the elephant we're holding in terms of that question. So I'm going to leave alone the entire part of the elephant that is, are we even making the right technology? Because I feel like you're answering that question so well, and the way that you're approaching, you know, we can build it, should we build it, kinds of dynamics, I think are really critical. So glad that you're looking at that. I think on my end, there are different players in the ecosystem that have to have different things, right? One of the most important, I think, right now is that for sizes of nonprofits, it makes a really big difference what approach you're going to take. Maybe that's the best way to start. So if you're talking about the World Visions and, the really large humanitarian USAID organizations, their digital transformation is really different than a community foundation or a nonprofit association. But we're calling all of that nonprofits. So I want to just say my focus of my work ends up really being along the lines of mid to small nonprofits, which is most of them, and especially small nonprofits, which can't afford professional services and the technology will never really be made for that size organization in a holistic way. And so I feel like that's where a bulk of the issue lies, because we really need to find a way, an approach that's affordable for them. And the last thing I'll say is, in the design constraints that I think about, we need solutions that they can afford, don't have to go get funding for, right? So we throw all of that in, which makes it really challenging, like on how to approach it. I do think that story is important because the mindset is really critical right now. And I think the mindset that we have been operating on is there's a right technology and there's a right approach and all of that. And I've come to the conclusion that we need to stop focusing on the technology or even the data to get there. And we need to start focusing on what they're doing correctly today. And if you look at most nonprofits, almost all of them are handling their financial data and their financial processes with financial software really well, almost without notice. So well, we don't even think about the fact that they're doing it. But that should tell us something really critical, which is that they're already capable of doing exactly what we think is important. They're already running their 90s and their tax status documents. They're already doing their financial. They're reporting to their board. They know how to do that. So the question really becomes, why can they do it in this area of their organization and not in the other areas of their organization? And I think the answer to that is because of the job description called bookkeeper. I think it's that simple. They know this role is critical to their success in financial reporting, so they have that role. And what they're missing is an information systems manager that does that same kind of a function for the other parts of their technology and data. And so I really focus on training around, here is the job description that you need. Here is the training that will get you there. And you've already probably got that person because you said to somebody, you're going to run all of our tech now. And the difference there is really a job description, reporting structure, and accountability. That's a very different approach to solving this technology problem than we need better technology or you don't know how to use data. And I think that actually is I'm finding that's getting a lot more traction. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and building up on that, you founded the Human Stack, right, which is created around human-centered technology solutions for nonprofits. Can you explain, just for people, like what does human-centered technology means to you, and how is it different than other methods of tech implementation?
Yeah, I wouldn't describe it as human-centric technology. I would say it's an approach to information systems that is human-centric, and the technology is one component of that. I think one way of understanding that is if we look at information systems, we need to include humans as half of the system. You've got a tech stack, and what was missing was a human stack. So I made it. So we have a human stack and we have a tech stack, and both of those work together to make information useful in the organization. And I think that one of the ways I'd best describe this is when you go to solve information system problems, technology problems, if the first question you ask is what solution do we need for this? How are we going to get it? When would we start that? And who's going to do it from our team, right? That is the typical way that we approach that. Even I, as a consultant, that was the way that I was approaching it. And what I found is if you just reverse the questions, you start with who on our team can do this? When do they have good capacity for it? how can we help them do it the best way that they know how, get the support that they need, and then what is it that they need to do, right? That will end you, if you start that way, you'll end up with a human-centric center because you started with who. And I think what's been really missing in the approaches that we've taken is starting with what technology system do we need? And if you start with that, you're going to end up with a tech-centric approach instead of a human-centric approach. So I just really try and reverse the order and say, who is it that's on your team that can already do something about this? And let's start with the smallest problems possible, which are the ones that are happening out on the field with your day-to-day staff. We solve those problems first. With those staff, we'll start to see different kinds of solutions. And that has proven to be the point over and over again.
This one it touched on two different things because they relate both to what you just mentioned now. One is related to, you just mentioned capacity and how to have that conversation. And early when we started talking, you talked about a future where a human will control up to, for instance, 5 agentic AI, and the ability to amplify the technology to do more impact work. How do you have that conversation? And tied to that, what we're finding in both our conversations with the sector, as well as even in the Wall Street Journal last week, was the fact that comments like, what has AI really done? Like, what has ChatGPT done? And that's really, even in the Wall Street Journal, he was saying that it's just not a product, it's incremental products. That is what the Microsoft, OpenAI's, Apple's, they're in the business of doing incremental product driven, but that's not what AI is. How are you going about the conversation related to capacity, but having the understanding that AI isn't just ChatGPT? It's different levels of technology. One is out of the box, one is custom, and so forth. Is that when you're relating it to capacity and the ability to amplify and leverage it for work, are you having that conversation, and how receptive are your clients and the stakeholders that you're talking to?
Yeah, it's a great question and a great point. And there's, I think, at least 3 different levels that we're talking about on that. So really, really helpful to have it framed in terms of what's happening for individual agency around AI, right? And I think that I know I've seen so many people see what it can do for them, regardless of whether it's for work or personal, just the ability to move certain elements of their work forward, whether that's, hey, help me translate this old recipe that I've got into, this way of doing it for this many people with the ingredients that I've got in my fridge from a snapshot kind of a thing, right? Which it can do. It's just like able to do that kind of work. Whether it's that or whether it is help me organize a new structure for an organization, help me think through what that's going to look like, and having it act as a strategist on your team. So individuals are finding it really helpful. That alone, I think, negates what the Wall Street Journal is saying, that it's not actually helping organizations, because it's helping people in those organizations. And I find that over and over again. At the coordination level, I think the Wall Street Journal has a point. What we're ending up doing in organizations right now, especially with end user focused generative AI tools, is we're creating even smaller silos than we had before, where you've got individuals that are coming to work with their own tools because their organizational structures aren't paying for the tools and may not even be allowing them to use those tools. And so they're in a don't ask, don't tell kind of situation at work in a lot of places, a lot of nonprofits especially. And so I think that we're creating small, really, really small silos of pockets of it being used. And I think the question there becomes, how do we move that forward? The absolute bottom line question on that is, you get executive leaders to see the value of it for themselves personally, so that they'll have a conversation with the rest of their teams about it. One of the trainings that I'm just releasing now is called the Playbook for nonprofit leaders. And it's just an AI approach. It's just 1 hour of talking through what does it look like to coordinate this for your team? And a lot of it is just knowing the executives need to create vision and values around it. The operations side of things need to organize the policy and structures to define the coordination layer. Directors need to create accountability around how it's being used, right? These are the structures that we need. Those aren't that complicated, but you have to have the conversation, and executives are afraid of having it right now.
I am totally seeing that you just described. And I think it's a lot of that, or some of that, has to do with the inability for organizations to have the resources to actually pay for added tools, because they already have a budget for technology, and new tools represent newer items on the spreadsheet with more different amounts.
Okay, actually, can I push back on that idea? I don't think I think in this one case, it's actually not budget. This is affordable technology. It's one of the only affordable technologies out of the box. I think it really is more about vision than budget this time. Sorry,
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
just want to get that in, but please
Yeah,
go ahead.
sure. And then one thing that's not so related to that, but to perceptions, is that I'm encountering is about ethical considerations that some leaders may have about AI solutions. Does the fact that you use AI to refine an email response, or even create a response altogether, or just basically any type of content that you will generate using AI, what is the perception of what that output means, as opposed to something that somebody says, I didn't use AI at all, or I used generative AI to actually create some content? Like, those perceptions are, the kinds of things that I think sometimes need to be well clarified, so that, there will be a less resistance maybe.
I have lots and lots of thoughts about that. I would love to hear though, before I put mine out there, I'd love to hear what you guys are finding with that.
I know sometimes with Alex, we talk about this, but to me, it's just about having a proper framework of how you use it, right? Like, for example, if you just a simple prompt and you ask it to generate an email, or a simple prompt you ask it to generate an article that you're gonna just post, I don't think that is the way that you would be using it. I think there has to be some, like, the way I use it is like I write up my content from scratch without using any AI, and then I just use AI to systematically improve the output of what I essentially create. But then it is just like thinking about AI or generative AI as a layer to improving it, but not as the one that actually will reproduce the content itself. And I feel that if you kind of frame it this way, it can actually have a different way of perception. But I don't know, Alex.
Yeah, and I would distinguish a few different things. One, there's obviously there should be AI governance and policy to share sensitive information. Like there are examples now where you have even youth suicide organizations where employees, because there hasn't been any AI policy or governance, employees have shared information to LLMs, which obviously that sensitive data needs to have guidelines and governance and policy for it. But I think that we can't be afraid as a sector to use AI. We need to lean into understanding how to use it. And I think in that, we know that there's biases. We know that there are issues with LLMs, but there's also a reflection in a mirror of our society, or at least who is developing it. So it's an opportunity for us as a sector to say, here's how it is now. We understand it's not perfect, but it's a mirror that then we can be part of the conversation to see how to change.
Yeah, I think that's well said on all fronts. And what I'm finding is that the risks aren't well understood, and that people are reacting to the fear that they have, especially of perception, which is a real risk, but they're not taking the time to find out where is the risk. And so instead they're just reacting to the fear that they have, instead of really responding to specific risks that exist around it, right? And so I think that if the approach is taken where the risks are well understood, your ability to know which of those risks relate to you and your organization, and which of those risks are more related to the impact and reality of AI out in the world, you end up with a better understanding of which approach to take. And so I have an AI trampoline model on personal agency, and I call it a trampoline model because it just it's in the shape of a trampoline, and it kind of works that way. But what it really is helping to do is identify when we don't have as much power in situations, like risks that are societal, and how do we maintain personal agency responding to those risks? And when those risks are more interorganizational or personal to us, how do we find our way forward in that? A lot of that is just knowing, reducing our efficiency because we have a fear of societal, utility is not a rational choice. We need to be saying, yes, we need to advocate for a different kind of future, but in our organization, we still need to use technology as well as we can. And to mitigate those risks is more like two-factor authentication, which is a much bigger issue than almost all of the other risks that people are looking at around this. So I think that that's really important. But I don't think that risk and risk mitigation are going to drive anything. What's really going to drive it is benefit. Seeing your ability to do more, better, faster. That is actually what's pushing these organizations that are using technology or that are using AI forward.
I think that's a great point, and especially as we're talking about fear, we just had a conversation at the Mozilla Foundation just the other week around that fear or talking about or being bogged down by talking about AI for military use, for instance, which is very real. If we're in that mindset, that's not going to get us to thinking about AI for social impact. So that fear is blocking us from imagining a beneficial future. And I think I just wanted to ask you, given the fact that you've been working on nonprofit technology in Canada, in the US, and you're from Montana, and you've had conversation all over the place. Are you seeing differences in the approach to this? Because, for instance, I just talked to an organization that's working on bespoke level LLM and training sets for regions in Africa, and really leaning into data privacy, data sovereignty, and power dynamics in right ways. But the approach is very, very different than what we're seeing here from the sector. So how are you seeing differences between different regions?
And that's a great question. I'm so glad to hear that localization is a factor in the way that they're approaching that in Africa. I think that's amazing. I would love to know who's doing that. So I'd love to follow up on that. No, I'm not seeing regional differences, honestly. The regional differences that I see are much more aligned around what level of broadband access do you have? Because when I was in Africa earlier this year, speaking at a conference there in Ghana, they have X less broadband capacity and throughput that we have in the West. And so there's a massive difference on what that's going to produce. So I think that regional resourcing is one of the main issues. I think the other big issue, obviously, is going to be the way that innovation has been approached within governmental structures and governance in regions. I think that those open or close doors, but they create a very level playing field inside of those areas. I think it, by and large, has to do the most, and it's not even the differences that I see are not around size of organization or budget capacity for the first time. In some ways, smaller organizations are just leading the charge in innovation, finally. And I think that that's one of the very interesting things about AI these days, is that you can do that. I think a lot of it really goes back to mindset of leadership and their ability to listen to the rest of their organization. Leaders that do that well, that are looking for every edge they can to move their organization forward with integrity and with ethical use of whatever tools are available, but they have cultivated a strong digital culture within their organization. They are taking to this in a completely different way. And they're all stuck in the same spot, which is, how do we coordinate this? How do we get past individual silos? How do we find the right tools to do the same things that all of us are struggling with right now? They're at the forefront of that. Organizations that are fear bound and have a different kind of mindset, they're falling further behind because of that mindset.
Yeah, and just a quick reflection back before heading off to Norman for the last question. You mentioned digital equity, and I think that is how that focus in Africa is coming around, and digital equity as it relates to not just connectivity, but digital literacy and then AI literacy is currently a huge chasm internationally, and will become a monumental one if we don't close that gap and that divide. So
Yes, we're just closing. So I'm just gonna ask you a kind of like final question to you, and then if there's anything you would like to share to the audience in terms of what you do, how they can reach out to you, and anything that we didn't ask you that you would like to say. But the first question on that is, what is it that you think about when it comes to future? So as I'm sure you are following, Alex and I were chatting all the time about like anything that comes up every day. But at least from what I'm hearing, or at least when you hear someone talking, always just talking about like the phases of AI, and like we just reached phase 2 with the Reasoner or one preview, and obviously advanced voice that was launched, and all the use cases that brings forth. Whether it's that, whether you think about like the phases of AI that will come, phase 2, 3, 4, 5, etc., or whatever. What are some of the things that you you think about when it comes to future of AI and possibilities that may bring to the nonprofit sector?
Yeah, it is moving so fast. You guys are on the bleeding edge, so am I, on just what's coming out. And I cannot keep up. I mean, I've never seen things move this fast in technology. So, last week alone, I wrote a song for a product that I wanted to do. It was a great little ditty. And it was like, I would have spent weeks either doing it myself or finding the right people, going on Upwork, whatever. It was minutes, and it was like, great, right? That's completely new. Like, that's not even just writing. That's now music. I don't know if you were watching when Notebook LL came out, and I threw all of my course training into one notebook and had it create like that amazing podcast that they're just like producing in mass now. I'm like, what is happening? Every week there are 5 or 6 new tools and new use cases coming out. That level of velocity of change, none of us are prepared for that. None of, even those of us that spend a lot of time in technology, we are not prepared for that level of change. And so one of my main thoughts on that is the future is going to look like absorption layers. It's going to be about change saturation of organization, how you mitigate disruption and create structures around change of capacity. So organizations that figure out how to take different roles and functions inside their organization and coordinate their ability inside of each of those functions to handle change in a rapidly evolving world, they're going to do the best. It's the ones that are going to think meta about how their humans are able to think and react differently. Those are the ones that are going to really take advantage of this. And then the last thing I'll say on this is there are all sorts of advancements that people don't take advantage of, and it doesn't make them wrong or a bad approach, right? And I think that when it comes to the human stack, I just want to put a plug in for you don't have to make these changes. Now, I think it's important to. I think that there is value in it. But I also feel like I've seen organizations that intentionally slow down their quote unquote dev cycle, and they come out ahead because they focus so intentionally on what they're not going to do that they actually really intentionally do the stuff that matters to them. And so I also want to put in, even though I do think it's about the velocity of change, I think there's really strong ways of leading change by saying, we're not going to change over there. Here's why. When it's reactive, and people are just like, I'm afraid of it. And, I think that this might be efficiency versus, ethic. But that's not what I'm talking about. But, I've worked with religious organizations that are very traditional, where they have approaches where they're intentional about how they adopt technology. And I think that that is actually a very good way to go as well. The thing I want to say is that the technology is going to change rapidly. So rapidly that we are not like 9 months from now, I don't know what it's going to look like. Agentic, it'll be doing some stuff that we can't even imagine right now. It'll blow our minds off. It's amazing stuff. But the organizations that have sat back and said, no matter how crazy it's getting out there around what it can do, this is our core function. We're doing it. Here's the people that we do it with, and take an approach of being intentional that way. They're just going to do better. So I think that that's really important for us technologists to remember, is that just because it has been built doesn't mean we have to go use it. Alex, to steal from your book, I'm just doing the exact same thing on the human front that you're doing on the dev cycles, which is to say, let's be really critical and aware of how we're approaching this and what we're doing with it.
Yeah, because not everybody's like us, right? Like every day testing new tools and watching videos and reading articles. But
Right.
the leaders are not doing that. They're not exposed to that. But like, I think in our case, we are. And yeah, just to follow up, is we need the structures and frameworks in place that will be set in order to sustain proper understanding and eventual taking the opportunity to see what will come. Because, as you said, we're building up use cases, and it will be good to know that even if the leaders decide to just not do anything or just not significantly change things, at least they know what's available and they can make the decision based on, okay, I already know what's available. I will stay even though I know what's available, and I can just maybe I will just take 10% of what is there, but I know that it's 10%. At least I have that level of awareness. But yes.
I mean, one other thought on that. Yes, I think that that's exactly right. And there's also some wisdom in not being the beta testers with your organization, right? Everything's beta right now. Like, if you went out and spent a lot of time last year focusing on how to get your staff to do, hallucination prevention, this year, like, all of that development would have been kind of a waste, right? And so I feel like actually holding back and letting those of us that do that take the first round of what's actually useful out here, I think that's just a good play.
Right. Okay, so I think with that, unless there is anything you would like to add, Tim, about any of the work you do, there isn't.
Yeah,
Chris?
I would, but Alex, I'm dying to know what you're thinking about this, and I don't mind if we go over a few minutes. I really want to hear from you. What are you thinking about that?
In terms of the last point, yes, and then and I actually will quote one of our colleagues at Body Intelligence, is that out of Concordia, even though it's an international collaborative that's looking at indigenous knowledge and AI, they had a great framing, because I asked during one of our meetings, how do you actually move forward and have this research while it's moving so fast? And their response was that they move at the speed of intention. I think that's a good way to put it. I've struggled myself to make sure that you pause and reflect and build those processes in, but it's difficult. Like, part of it is new and shiny. We would love to see it being used for good, and also look at, understand the challenges. But I think understanding what it can do, and not only what out of the box, it's in the minds of developers that are often for profit driven. What should it look like in the eyes of the sector when we understand and move away from reactionary understanding of AI? I think is really, I think, to your point, to try to do that intentionally, leaning into the technology and understanding it, but doing it intentionally, I think is really, really up.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I love that. Moving at speed of intention. Yeah, I think that's well. I'll tell you a little bit about my work here, but I just want to say thank you for the level of intention that you bring to this conversation. I think that it's so critical. I know that you're doing a lot. I've seen some of the models that you're creating, and that thought space is so critical to what we're doing. And so just thank you very much for doing that. In terms of finding my work, I've created an academy. So the Human Stack Academy is a great place to start for people. So I have two different AI courses. One of those is for leaders that's just coming out. It'll be out in the next 2 weeks. And that is the Nonprofit AI Playbook. It's very affordable and it's about one sitting. And the idea here is I want to help leaders in a long lunch be able to absorb just enough content to know how should I be thinking about this as a leader? Whether you're a leader at the coordination and, ops level, whether you're a leader at just a director, whether you're an executive, what does it look like for me to lead this with our team? So that's the AI playbook. There's also some hands-on work that people do in that. The other training that I put out, and it's also a long lunch, just, affordable, fast, being able to get in and learn something. So that's AI for anyone. And it really is for anyone. So if people just don't know what an LLM is, they're not really sure. They prompted 3 times. It was terrible. They don't know why people are excited, but their team is starting to use it and they have to learn something. This is a long lunch approach to getting your hands into AI, understanding what the terms are, seeing what's possible with it, and setting yourself up in the ChatGPT situation where you can feel confident about the security and getting, better at writing some of these kinds of foundational tools and skills. So those are 2 courses. There, people can also find me on LinkedIn. That's where I'm most active these days. So you find the Human Stack and Tim Lockie are both on LinkedIn.
Well, thank you, Tim. It was really an invigorating conversation, and I think, as we said at the beginning, it'd be good to have you back and continue to have these conversations because there will be always more things to talk about. And
Absolutely.
yeah,
Would love to.
with that, I also want to thank the people that were listening to this and always follow us and share this podcast episode. And we'd like to see you again and have more conversations upcoming episodes. Thank you. Thank you all.